morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by ServPro. What a great mood we are in today, because what big news Georgia got yesterday when five-star quarterback Jared Curtis made his pledge to Georgia. You already know we're talking all about this. We were doing it last night on video. We'll do it with you here again today. That means Jake Fromm stops by. That means Connor Riley stops by. We'll look at all of the angles of why this is really being celebrated as just big national news. Georgia, who we've gotten very used to seeing winning recruiting battles left and right, now also winning it at the quarterback position, which is the place in recent years where that kind of hasn't always been true. But boy, it was true yesterday. A lot to discuss on this, including perhaps the most important question of all, which is what comes next after the Curtis news. You would imagine we got thoughts on that. We'll give those to you here today as well. So it's a fun show. We love it on days like this. We had a great time with you on video last night. We're glad to be back doing this with you here again today. So let's get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me begin by saying, how about them dogs? What a day yesterday for Georgia as five-star quarterback Jared Curtis makes his commitment to UGA. This is a big deal. It's one of those things where we have gotten very used to seeing Georgia winning, and for those of us who are Georgia fans, we say this thankfully. So we've gotten very used to seeing Georgia winning the kind of big-time recruiting battles. That happens a lot. Georgia adds a lot of elite four-star and five-star players into every recruiting class, but you'll just notice that the reverberations are just a bit different when it happens around the quarterback position. When it's quarterback that we're talking here, all of a sudden people notice this in a way that doesn't get noticed about other positions. When Georgia gets a big recruit, in other words, in normal times, in a normal situation, a big recruit becomes a big deal within the recruiting industry. But when you get a big recruit, and for right now, of course, it's just a commitment. We understand that, and we're living in a kind of a tumultuous age, of course, but we're going to deal with this news as we understand it here right now, that when you get a big recruit that is a quarterback, it's more than just a big deal in the recruiting industry. It actually sort of extends beyond the normal borders of the recruiting discussion and becomes something that's a little bit more mainstream. So much so that yesterday, ESPN on its main platform, ESPN.com, is writing a story about Jared Curtis and the fact that he came to Georgia and giving Georgia a lot of credit for the fact that it got Curtis. In fact, I want to read this. Tommy Luganbill, one of the writers for this there at ESPN.com, saying that Curtis's return to the Bulldogs 2026 class, you'll obviously remember the timeline here. Curtis committed to Georgia last March, decommitted in October, now returning to the class. Luganbill saying that Curtis's return to the Bulldogs 2026 class marks I love this phrase here, crucial recruiting victory for Coach Kirby Smart and his staff. Curtis now lands as the highest ranked of the 4 ESPN 300 pledges in the program's incoming class, a collection of talent that will surely grow this summer as Georgia contends for a 10th consecutive top 3 signing class. Now listen to this. If he signs later this year, Curtis will arrive as the program's 3rd highest-ranked quarterback pledge in the ESPN recruiting era. Now, most of us don't really think the ESPN recruiting era ever really began, but ESPN obviously thinks that highly of itself, saying, in the era in which ESPN's covering recruiting, you'll put this in the same category of other top quarterbacks, trailing only Justin Fields, who was number 1 overall in 2018, and Matthew Stafford, going all the way back to 2006. So that's how big of a deal the Jared Curtis thing is. Kind of in the same category of when Georgia got Justin Fields and going all the way back nearly 2 decades ago when it got Matthew Stafford. And I mentioned this to, I guess it was Connor Riley, who did join us on the live broadcast last night ahead of the Curtis announcement, that as we got closer and closer to this, I do think that the buzz got really big for this. I don't think it was as big as the Matthew Stafford thing was in 2006, to be honest with you. And we didn't see like a helicopter flying like we did for the Justin Fields thing going back 2018. So I would say it's not quite in the category of those two recruitments, but honestly, it was a really big deal. I thought that you saw a real pickup in interest and attention and chatter about this as you got closer to it, that it was at least in the same kind of neighborhood as some of these other major quarterbacks that have chosen to come to Georgia. And I do think in a roundabout way, not everybody cares about media stuff, but the fact that ESPN's kind of writing main page of their college football, page of ESPN.com, kind of writing this story sort of tells that. I think that demonstrates that Curtis's arrival at Georgia, or his commitment to Georgia, we believe it'll become an arrival after December, is a pretty big deal. Now, the other thing that the story at ESPN.com kind of pointed out, and I think that, and listen, a lot of this is sort of hard to read. The intangible stuff always is. That's what makes it intangible, after all. But, a lot of the stuff that you see when you kind of observe Curtis, when you listen to him speak, when you kind of watch the moxie with which he plays, there's a little bit of a tiny edge that's noticeable here. There's a little bit of a little saltiness or something. I'm probably not even putting in the right words to it, but some of the same stuff we would say about Stetson Bennett, even though Bennett, very different kind of player, different, certainly, build and body type for sure. But there was always a little bit of a edgy veneer to Stetson Bennett. There was always a little bit of once again, to use the word I used a moment ago, a little bit of a saltiness here. It wasn't always quite the aw shucks persona that you would have assumed the former walk-on quarterback would have. That Bennett just sort of always saw him in a slightly different way. And I would say with Curtis, there's some of that too, where it's hard to kind of put into words, and you don't necessarily describe it very well, but there's a little bit of an interesting edge here to Jared with how he speaks about himself and kind of how he speaks about his process, and really kind of content to go about this his own way. And that's one of the other things the ESPN story kind of highlighted is that, a lot of this sort of adds up to, it's more than just the big arm, the big body type, better athleticism than sometimes you would expect for a bigger quarterback. There's also kind of an insatiable competitive edge that someone like Jared Curtis brings to the table. And that's the part I think Georgia fans really love. The tangible characteristics of how big you are, how hard you throw it. Sometimes that matters. But honestly, in the heat of battle, sometimes what makes a quarterback great is just the will to get it done. And sometimes what makes a quarterback great is the willingness of the players around him to want to follow that guy into proverbial battle. That's sometimes what it's all about. And that was the other interesting part of the story I just referenced from ESPN.com, the fact that they seem to, their scouts, Luganville, a guy you've seen him on TV, their scouts seem to like the kind of competitive edge part of Jared Curtis every bit as much as they like the very easily measured physical specs, arm strength, things like that. They like the other part just as much as the stuff we can see with our own eyes, and I take some comfort in that. And perhaps we saw a little bit of an example of that yesterday from him. I'm going to play an exchange here that Jared had with our Jeff Sintel, where Jeff, asking a question I think he asked to a lot of recruits, for people who are just acquainting themselves with you, what do they need to know about what it is that you're bringing to the University of Georgia? And that kind of competitive edge, competitive fire, I think you see a little bit of this in the answer that Jared gives. Listen to this. I thought this was a pretty interesting exchange. It's not super long, but I did think it was kind of interesting. Jared Curtis with Jeff Sintel from yesterday.
Jared, what do you want DawgNation to know that they're getting in Jared Curtis? What are they getting in this quarterback, strong-arm quarterback from Nashville, Tennessee?
I'm ready to work, go up there. I got a lot to learn, but I want to go up there and hopefully make an impact pretty early. But I'm going to work for sure 100%, and I'm looking forward to it.
So there you go. That's Jeff Sintel with Jared Curtis. And there's the element of that where I used the phrase like aw shucks a moment ago, that where it sort of starts off with the sort of aw shucks answer that you hear recruits give all the time, where they say, hey, listen, I'm going there ready to work. I've got a lot to learn. And you're sort of ready for Curtis to keep going down that path. And he does say all those things, but he also admits and acknowledges in that clip that he'd also like to make an early impact at Georgia. So it's kind of both sides of a fairly interesting coin of, listen, I'm stepping up in level. I'm going to one of the best programs in America. I've got to absorb the information that's going to be required from that. And yet there is also just a little bit of self-confidence that kind of comes through in that answer from Jared Curtis, where even with the new information I'm going to be asked to absorb, and even with the steep learning curve that comes with playing major college football, I'd still like to make an early impact. I'd still like to be the guy on the field for Georgia as quickly as possible. And I would say that competitive fire that Curtis displays there is perhaps some of the same kind of stuff that ESPN recognized about him in the story that it wrote yesterday for ESPN.com. Let me also kind of shift to this. I think the other big thing, two big things really, about this Curtis news yesterday is that it puts to rest, at least for a while, perhaps forever, puts to rest two conversations that are discussions that probably needed to have been had, but now they have been had, and maybe we've got the information we need to sort of stop talking about this for a couple of moments. Thing number one I want to mention is the NIL here. As we've gone through all of this with Jared Curtis, I don't know. I have personally, I don't know if you felt the same way. I have personally gone through a little bit of a transformation where the closer and closer we got to Curtis's decision, whether he'd chosen Georgia or whether he had chosen Oregon. To be honest with you, I just found the NIL part of this the least interesting part of the whole deal. I really did. I'm sort of bored with the NIL part of this here for right now, because while I don't believe that Georgia is the biggest spending team from an NIL standpoint, frankly, the teams that spend more are just more desperate, probably. But while I don't believe that Georgia is the biggest spending team in college football when it comes to an NIL type thing, and as we move into the new revenue sharing world where it's a little bit of a hybrid of NIL and sort of, regular, revenue payments from the programs themselves, I don't know that Georgia is the biggest spending program that's out there. But at the same time, in fact, I know that Georgia isn't, but while I don't believe that Georgia spends the most of anybody, we've never got an indication that Georgia isn't competitive with what it's offering to individual players with its roster payroll overall. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be getting the kinds of recruits that it gets, and it wouldn't be winning all the games that it does. We are in the pay-for-play era of college football. Georgia is continuing to win. Therefore, they must be paying at a competitive rate. It's sort of as simple as that. And look, when you sort of introduce a lot of this stuff, not quite on the record, but certainly more above the surface than it's ever been before, there's going to be a little bit of a fascination of, can you believe these kids make this money? But the truth is, if Curtis doesn't get that money from Georgia, he gets it from somebody else. And if Georgia doesn't use that money on Curtis, they're going to pivot to somebody else. In fact, later on, we'll talk about the fact that Oregon's already pretty quickly done that with another quarterback here in this class of 2026, that ultimately every program spending big bucks, all the top recruits are going to get big players, that as we kind of get deeper into this, the impact of the NIL on this particular decision, it just kind of becomes a little bit uninteresting to me because it's sort of the same from program to program and from player to player. This is just now kind of the cost of doing business. Worth having the discussion to begin with, but I think it's getting a little bit tired now. The other thing where I sort of feel the same way is as it relates to the Georgia offense that Jared Curtis is going to play in, and the architect of that, Mike Bobo. And listen, there's a phrase you hear a lot in like the news and in life now. It kind of comes from, I guess, the language of psychology a little bit. You know what gaslighting is? Gaslighting is when you intentionally fill people with lies, not acknowledging that they're lies, as a way of just sort of confusing them with what the actual truth is. That's what I think the definition of gaslighting is. The point is my attempt is not to gaslight any of you. I do believe the Georgia offense needed to be better than it was in 2024, and it will need to show improvement here in 2025. I don't think it's ever been an unfair discussion to say, what does Georgia need to do to get better offensively? Because if Georgia performs offensively the way that it did last season, for all the various reasons it was true that it did, if Georgia performs at that same level here in 2025, then the end-of-season goals that Georgia has won't achieve them. That's a real conversation. We've never been afraid of saying that Georgia needs offensive improvement. But what we have stopped short of saying, that others have said, is that improvement is impossible because Georgia has a deficient offensive coordinator in place in Mike Bobo. On our show, we believe that Georgia needs offensive improvement, and we've also believed that the current Georgia coaching staff that is in place is capable of producing that improvement. That is the stake we've put in the ground on all of this, that Mike Bobo is a coach of the level that can produce the sort of offense that Georgia needs to compete for a national championship, that he could replicate the success that Todd Monken, for instance, had here, certainly the two national championship seasons of 2021 and 2022. We have believed that a possibility for Mike Bobo, while also acknowledging that the performance for that unit needs to be better than it was last season. That's sort of our opinion on this kind of in a nutshell. And for those who just simply don't buy into that, I do think that yesterday, for that pocket of Georgia fans, was a very interesting day, because I thought, being on air live when all this was playing out, I thought that among many winners for Georgia, and all of us who are part of Dog Nation can kind of claim victory when a guy like Curtis, makes an announcement to come to your program. But of all the big winners for Georgia yesterday, I thought pretty clearly Mike Bobo was the biggest winner of all. In fact, we said this live on the air as all this was playing out. Just the way in which Jared Curtis, kind of shooting from the hip, speaking from the heart, not really planned remarks, but as he continued to speak, the way in which that Curtis gave something close to a ringing endorsement from Mike Bobo, it was very hard not to notice that yesterday. And so what I want to do for you here for a second is kind of play. This is a kind of just a compilation of two clips. I could have played more. We just picked out two. Compilation of two clips where you really get the sense that Curtis likes Bobo, and you really come away with the obvious conclusion that Curtis is coming to Georgia in large measure because of the impact that Mike Bobo had on him and his family. Here are a couple of answers kind of clipped together from Jared Curtis yesterday.
Just talking to Coach Bobo, I've been up there so many times and built a relationship with all the coaches, but getting up there with Coach Bobo and him coming down to us, so that made an impression, and just getting to talk to him was just really good in general. I'd say Coach Bobo, he's been doing it a long time, and he's told me that he doesn't have any desire to stop now, so I feel like he knows a lot about the game, and he'll get me to where I want to be for sure.
It's the last part of that that's really interesting. Bobo telling Curtis, hey, listen, I got no desire to stop doing this anytime soon. Now, what's not said, but maybe could be added to that, is so don't listen to the rumors, don't pay attention to the radio host, don't fall prey to any of the Paul Feinbaum chatter. Ignore all of that. I love the job that I'm doing. I want to keep doing it, and I want to do it with you. The fact that Jared Curtis views that as good news, I think, is a really interesting thing. And the fact that the future for Georgia could be so bright that a five-star quarterback, the likes of which that seemingly every program in America was chasing after, wants to hitch his wagon to this, I think that's kind of an exciting time. So the bottom line is, this is a really fun day for Georgia. Mainstream media attention for getting the five-star quarterback, the five-star quarterback expressing a really optimistic belief in what a great program can do to achieve even more success in the future. If you're a Georgia fan, there is nothing, to use a double negative, there is nothing not to like today. Very interesting times as Georgia lands one of its biggest possible gets here for the class of 2026. Now, of course, the big question is what comes next. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But first, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. What a great pleasure it is to have you with us, whether it's video. Now, we're live at 10 a.m. across every platform. That means at DawgNation.com, YouTube, Facebook, everything else, the X platform, of course, too. Most of you don't watch live, you watch after the fact. And if you're checking us out on demand, whether it kind of meets your schedule to go to the gym or your evening commute or whatever your sort of story is on that, whenever you watch the show, thank you very much. We say the same thing to our podcast folks. That's kind of all on demand for people. Still, on a daily basis, about the biggest platform, really most days, the biggest single platform we have. Folks love listening to the show, and I'm glad about that. Of course, we're also proud to be on the radio with our friends in Athens Sports Radio, Radio 96 The Rev 2. Just thrilled about all of that, and so happy to have you with us here today. And big thanks to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible. Now, special thanks from me to ServPro, because ServPro also had me as their guest for the wonderful Riley Green show at Aikens Ford Arena on this past Thursday in Athens. That's self-serving, but I do certainly appreciate them having me there for that. And more importantly, I appreciate the fact that for our audience, I'm talking about people who have a lot of stakes in the game here, whether it be with their home or their business, where a lot of you own like warehouse space, rental property, things like that. you've got property, and when that property is damaged by fire or water intrusion or anything like that, the folks from ServPro are there to take good care of you and restore that property back to its previous condition. That's why they call themselves restoration specialists. And it's a really important thing to be a part of, because if you own property long enough, eventually you may have one of these issues, right? I mean, I told you we're in the midst of kind of moving studios. I think they've had another issue over there at the brand new corporate headquarters. Stuff like this happens. Water pipes burst, fire breaks out, there's weather-related catastrophes. It's just a normal part of life. Although if it happens to you, it's certainly serious. That's why you want serious people doing that work for you. That's what our friends at ServPro are all about. You can find them online at servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for more on that today, and really learn about their story. Each franchise independently owned and operated. Find out the kind of work they can do for you, the way they can also kind of relate to the insurance companies, and just sort of kind of be your kind of point of contact and sort of run point on the entire cleanup, no matter what kind of scale it is, from a small scale thing all the way up to sort of a large scale, situation, oftentimes in sort of a weather related situation, about, many city blocks sometimes that are maybe without power, without, water, without, just any kind of basic utilities, working to get everything restored and put back together and just kind of get life operating again. That's what our folks from ServPro are all about. So find them online. It is servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for a lot more on that. All right. A great day to have a great former quarterback on the show. Jake Fromm later on will tell us more of his thoughts on Jared Curtis here on the big decision day. Also, Connor Riley coming up in just a couple of moments. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today. And I want to talk more about kind of what's next for George in the immediate aftermath of the Curtis decision. Now, one of the things you may have seen on social media was that the five-star offensive tackle, a guy we've talked about plenty in recent days, Jackson Cantwell, he was on social media shouting out Curtis and congratulating him for choosing Georgia yesterday. And in Curtis's post-decision press conference, the name Jackson Cantwell also came up there. Curtis saying that he's ready to get to work on bringing guys into this 2026 class from Georgia. He's been seemingly kind of focused on his own process here, but now ready to kind of broaden that out and focus a little bit more on who else could join him. And one of the names that does come up there is Jackson Cantwell. This is what Curtis said about that in his press conference yesterday.
I'm going to start today, but I've been talking to Jackson a little bit, and then talked to Vance a couple of times and some other players. But I'm definitely going to start this evening and start to ramp it up a lot.
And listen, Jared Curtis turned in to be a man of his word when he said, listen, I'm going to get started right away. He literally got started right away, because when Curtis spoke those words, I'm guessing it was roughly about, let's say, 5:45, 5:50 Eastern time, just before 5 p.m. Central time, where he lives there in Nashville. That's when Curtis would have spoken that. By like 15 minutes later, he had already kind of made, I guess, his first overtures to Jackson Cantwell, or most recent overtures to Jackson Cantwell, and already had a plan in place about how he's going to help Georgia secure Cantwell's eventual pledge and commitment. With Jackson coming into Georgia this weekend, Jared Curtis telling our Jeff Sentell that he plans on now being in Athens for that. This was a fun moment that kind of played out on our video last night. This was from a one-on-one interview after the press conference. Jared telling Jeff he plans on being in Athens with Jackson. And by the way, told his parents about this while the video is taking place. This is fun stuff. Take a look at this.
I'm going to Georgia there's Coach Bobo right there. I'm going to Georgia this weekend, and I'll be up there with Jackson. Change of plans. I don't think she knows that yet, but I'm going to.
You're going to. And how important will that be, sir?
Very big, Got to have somebody protect me. So I love Jackson. I've talked to Jackson a couple of times, and I'm excited to get to meet him and talk to him in person for the first time. So I'm excited.
So I don't know. This is fun for me. And listen, I know I'm probably, a little too sentimental sometimes, a little too maybe old school times. But, doesn't this feel like throwback just a little bit for a recruiting era in which we currently live in that doesn't always give you good throwbacky vibes? The idea that great players want to play with great players, and that, there's still the, I'm going to come down there and be with you for your visit. And, the parents hearing about that. I don't know if he referenced Coach Bobo. I don't know if Coach Bobo was on a Zoom hookup for that or what. I didn't quite fully get the context on that. But that's just kind of a fun throwback. And now Jared Curtis is ready to do like other quarterbacks do. I don't quite know that we live in remember the old phrase, like the Pied Piper? I don't quite know that we're in kind of a Pied Piper age anymore where a whole bunch of guys are going to choose, Georgia or anywhere else because a quarterback went there. But there can still be some coattails here. And as Curtis says, listen, you got to have great blindside protection. And if you're Jackson Cantwell, listen, these are physical battles, man. You don't want to be doing it in vain. You don't want to be wasting your time, colliding with another man for 4 hours without the prestige that comes by way of winning. You don't want to do that. You want to sort of feel like you're playing in a place that matters. And the presence of a guy like Jared Curtis certainly makes Georgia feel like it's a place that matters. So fun stuff. It played out on video. Curtis commits to Georgia, says, I'm now getting ready to get to work on bringing in some other great players. And shortly after that, he's already connecting with Jackson Cantwell and making plans to be in Athens with him this weekend. I think that's all really, really good. Love to see that. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. So before we're done, we'll kind of talk about how Oregon, after losing on Curtis yesterday, how they've kind of very quickly pivoted. And we'll kind of explain more about what that means for Georgia. And we'll get some thoughts from Jake Fromm on all of this too. But for now, on everything else, on the Curtis angle here, the whole discussion about what comes next, let's do all of that right now with Connor Riley today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Connor Riley. And Connor, I'll bring you on what we were just discussing. We don't live in a very old school, sentimental world in recruiting anymore. But honestly, the whole thing of, hey, I'm going to go to Athens and be there when Jackson Cantwell comes take his visit, that's kind of a fun throwback for me. And listen, I'm not naive. I know that Jackson's decision on this, I believe he has, like a Drew Rosenhaus is his agent or something like that. So pretty clearly he's not going to be swayed alone by going to, the Grill or somewhere like that with Jared Curtis. But it's still just kind of fun to hear guys talking that way and fun to hear Curtis really kind of demonstrate what he said he would do in his press conference, which is get right to work on helping Georgia get 2026 prospects, acting pretty quickly as it comes to Jackson Cantwell. It would certainly be great to see Georgia follow up with Cantwell after securing Curtis yesterday, right?
Yeah, I think if Georgia wants to land Jackson Cantwell, I hope Jared Curtis wouldn't take him to the Grill in downtown Athens. But, you mentioned old school, and I think that's the feeling that you get from this commitment. There was the build-up all day to it. You had the ceremony there, maybe breaking from tradition, and no pomp, no circumstance, just right off the bat announcing that he's coming to Georgia. Super quick, super easy. We were all, I think, a little bit stunned just how quickly this all took place. But I think if you're a Georgia fan, this is obviously a big win for the program. This is a guy you, I think, had to get in this recruiting class, given all that you had already invested in him. And now what this allows them to do for the rest of this cycle. And look, Georgia-Oregon was going to be an interesting back and forth here as they go for Jared Curtis and then also Jackson Cantwell. I think were the top two schools for both of those players. And if Georgia's able to win both of those recruiting battles, that says a lot to me in the age of 2026 in terms of going out and being able to win these big-time recruiting battles and the price that you think you would have to pay to win some of these recruiting battles. I know Justin Tull has written this before, so we're looking at the math and whatnot when it comes to all this. Is Georgia really going to be able to afford in a theoretical revenue-sharing post-house settlement world Jackson Cantwell, Jared Curtis, Tyler Atkinson, the rest of a very talented class? And so far, it looks to be that way. And if Georgia's able to add Jackson Cantwell on top of adding Jared Curtis, the number one offensive lineman in the country, pairing him with the number one quarterback, it's a pretty solid foundation to build your recruiting class around moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's true. And to kind of pull back the curtain for a second, you mentioned this. So doing these shows on video is always really interesting. And, there are a couple of rules I try to follow. A, we have a larger audience for these than just our normal DawgNation audience. So you kind of try to sort of, try to serve the larger audience, try to be, kind of as professional as we want to be, buttoned up, things like that. But there's also a kind of a certain cadence that we try to adhere to with this kind of thing where, hey, you don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to miss anything or be confused by anything. And, sometimes these commitment ceremonies get a little weird. Oftentimes they are dragged out. And so when one of these happens yesterday, where it's not dragged out at all, you didn't have 15 speeches before Curtis made his deal. Curtis didn't have some long preamble. Like, the thing started, Curtis spoke. Within a few seconds, he's showing off the retro-themed Georgia T-shirt. And in my mind, I'm like, wait, is it really this simple and cut and dry? Did we really go from broadcast to announcement within a matter of seconds? Because this thing could have been built up a lot longer than that if they wanted to. And so in my mind, we're trying to execute and orchestrate the broadcast here. In my mind, I'm like, is there a swerve coming? Because they don't typically get right to the heart of the matter quite so quickly. I will pull back the curtain and let people know that I was definitely caught off guard by the pace with which the announcement was made yesterday.
Yeah, we've done enough of these now. You think KJ Bolden a few years ago when he picks Florida State, and you're like, wait, is that real? Like, did he really just pick Florida State? And you're waiting like a beat or two to make sure that like that's what he did. CJ Wiley similarly a year ago. So for Curtis to just get up there, take the jacket off, and show the Georgia T-shirt underneath it, I think speaks to maybe a little bit, and maybe this is reading far too much into it, that he was just ready to be done with this recruiting process and wanted to put it all to rest. Because obviously when you're the number one quarterback in the country, that puts you under a certain level of scrutiny, and that puts you under a microscope. And so I'm going to be interested moving forward just to sort of see what he looks like, how vocal he is, how much of he is, as you mentioned the word Pied Piper, how much of that he is as, a quarterback sort of has to be the face of a recruiting class. That has obviously changed a lot, I would say, over the past decade or so, not even so much on this idea of NIL and everything that comes with that. But I just think moving forward with Jared Curtis, I think yesterday, again, was very much an endpoint that he was very glad to get to. And it sounds like, by all accounts, he was solid with Georgia for quite some time, getting back to his last official visit back in March. Unofficial visit, I should clarify there. And so I think now that you have Curtis in the bag, hopefully a lot of the questions, the circumstances around it have been finally put to rest, because he was a guy that committed early, then decommitted, and then took a bunch of visits, and now seems to have finally come to his home in Athens.
So I said this a moment ago, and I don't know if this is going to make sense. I guess I'm curious to find out if you think it does. Over the course of the time we've been talking about Jared Curtis, I've sort of grown bored with the notion of NIL and how much it's going to cost or whatever else. And my feeling on that is kind of multifaceted from the standpoint that, listen, if Georgia doesn't spend this money on Curtis, they're going to spend it on something. And if Curtis doesn't take Georgia's offer, then someone else is going to be making a very similar offer. And look, I do realize that there's like a small handful of programs that are sort of thought to be able to outbid Georgia, but they're clearly not in every situation outbidding them by magnitudes. Otherwise, Georgia wouldn't be getting the players that it's getting. There is a part of me that is sort of fascinated with where all this money's coming from, because I sort of feel like, just to be completely honest, I feel like I know a few pretty rich people and, kind of know some of the money around Georgia. But there is clearly a different level of money that's invisible around Georgia, if you get what I'm saying, that, a certain sort of richness that's bought anonymity, because I don't really know where all this money's coming from, but it's clearly coming from somewhere, because Georgia is certainly not shrinking in these competitions. Yes, Texas, Miami, Oregon, the kind of programs you think of commonly as maybe having the ability to outbid Georgia, but not in all ways and not in every circumstance. And so one way or another, whatever this is just the cost of doing business. Georgia is in business to do business. Therefore, it pays the cost. I am now officially bored with NIL talk.
Yeah, and there's been such a misnomer, I think, about Georgia and NIL and where it is, because I think you're right to point out, like, they're not Texas. They're not Texas Tech. They're not Oregon. They are not the deepest pocketed NIL bidder where they can just, for certain recruitments, just throw the absolute most money at it. One, I think even if Georgia could do that in a world where, Georgia oil money is a theoretical thing, Kirby Smart wouldn't want to build his program in that way, where you are paying more for guys that haven't done anything than guys who have gone out and proven themselves in the program. And two, you mentioned this, and I want to reiterate this out there, because there's a lot of frustration that comes with NIL. You can't sign a top 4 recruiting class each year for 8 consecutive cycles if you are poor. Like, that just doesn't happen. Right. Even in a pre-NIL world, like that is not feasible. Like, that is just, you're blind to the situation if you were thinking that Georgia is just getting all of these guys because they just want to come for the G. Like, they have always had money in this regard, and they will continue to have money. I think moving forward, and the thing that is so interesting to me when it comes to the economics of this Curtis situation and how it all plays, you mentioned, okay, they're giving the money to Curtis, but if they don't give it to Curtis, that money's going to go elsewhere. Well, now they've given it to Curtis. And I think, and I wrote this morning, they've got to make it work with Jared Curtis. They've got to get the most out of that offer, because the opportunity cost now in college football, especially under the idea that there's going to be revenue sharing going forward, makes it all the more critical that you're getting the absolute most out of your roster that is afforded to you by this salary cap, which will be roughly around $13.8 million. And if you're paying a backup quarterback who, let's be honest, isn't going to get a lot of reps, a sizable chunk out of that revenue cap, that's a very poor investment of funds. And so going forward, the teams that are going to win championships more often than not are the teams that are going to be able to best make use of their money, of their resources. And so Curtis obviously comes with a certain high price tag. And so having that in mind, again, they're going to have to make it work with Jared Curtis in a way they didn't with Jacob Eason, they didn't with Justin Fields, they didn't with Brock Vandagriff. All those guys were five-star quarterbacks, and yet Georgia still found a way to win championships without them. They're going to have to find a way, I think, moving forward, because of the new constraints that college football is under, to win with Jared Curtis as their quarterback whenever that day might ultimately come.
I think it's really interesting that we're going to have Jake Fromm on the show in a minute, because I think Jake Fromm's kind of an interesting line of demarcation here, in that if Gunnar Stockton does this year what Fromm did in 2017, if Georgia wins the SEC, if it goes to college football playoff, if it advances to a national championship game, then my guess is in 2026, Gunnar Stockton is Georgia's starting quarterback. And if for whatever reason Georgia finishes below that and Stockton's performance is kind of, commensurate with a little bit below what Georgia's end of season expectations would be, at that point in time, I think all bets are off. Maybe Gunner's the starting quarterback in 2026, but I would certainly give Jared Curtis, because of the skill set, because of what seems to be a little bit of a moxie here, even with sort of a steep learning curve, I'd give him a chance to be the starter in his first year. I don't know that I would predict that necessarily, but I'm also not ruling it out. And I'm sort of okay with whatever. If Stockton plays in such a way this year, then, hey, ultimately all I want is Georgia to win games, however it wins them. So if Stockton's that guy in 2026 because of how he plays this year, or maybe Gunner lights the world on fire, maybe he goes to the NFL. I guess that's also a possibility here too. In other words, there are all kinds of scenarios that could play out, and as long as it coincides with Georgia winning games, I don't really care. I'm like you. I don't want Georgia to waste money on a player that isn't playing. But if it's coming, while also winning games, I guess you can't nitpick it too much. Do you get the point I'm making here? Maybe I'm not making it clearly.
No, I get the point you're making, and I think maybe the smart aleck in me has the retort of, would you give Jared Curtis as much of a chance with Gunnar Stockton on the roster to be the starter as Kirby did Justin Fields in 2018?
Listen, I think that Curtis will be treated differently than Fields was in 2018. I do. I think Kirby's a different coach. I think we're kind of in a different era. I think that maybe if they had a chance to go back and do the 2018 thing over, I think they would have probably made the same choice at quarterback. I think they may would have spoken about it a little bit different. Maybe they wouldn't have taken Justin at all. It's like the whole thing was just sort of weird from the get-go. That maybe if they had a chance to sort of re-rack that and just do it differently, they would have. You and I were at the Super Bowl opening night that year, and Trent Dilfer, who at the time was the Elite 11 kind of head coach, they call him the head coach, but he was basically the CEO of the Elite 11. He said he told Justin Fields not to come to Georgia, that they've already got a starting quarterback, and you ain't going to be it. That's what Dilfer told Fields, and Fields came to Georgia anyway. So, no, I don't think Curtis is going to be Justin Fields 2.0, at least if I had to guess. Now, my predictions are often wrong, but if I had to guess, no, I don't believe that Curtis is going to be Fields 2.0, which was essentially a toxic situation from the word go. We have video evidence that Justin Fields was already unhappy in the second game of that season. And one way or another, I don't believe that's going to be what happens with Jared Curtis. No, I don't believe so.
And I would agree with that. I actually think that this is an example, and maybe what will help Jared in his transition is the fact that the competition is what it is in the league that he plays in. Whereas Justin, he was playing in a higher level classification in Georgia. There was a reason to believe that he could come in and theoretically play right away. And so the fact that the competition level is what Jared plays against, I think is going to help him take a longer term view when it comes to making that transition to the next level. And I think one of the more interesting things that I heard yesterday from Jared, and it was a small thing that, may have gotten, overlooked in that scrum. The first player that Jared mentioned talking to and having a tight relationship at Georgia, it wasn't Talon Taylor, though he came up very quickly in succession. It wasn't a wide receiver. It wasn't Elias Williams, Ethan Barbour, future teammates of his they're going to be catching passes. It was Ryan Puglisi. And Ryan, and I hope to write about this at some point over the next 24 hours, the addition of Jared Curtis, I think, puts so much now more attention on Ryan Puglisi and what's going to happen with him going forward. Because, look, the backup quarterback is always the most popular person in Athens. But, whatever ends up happening with Gunner, who I think will be Georgia's starting quarterback for the next 2 seasons, Puglisi is still clearly, as we saw this spring, a popular option. But what happens 2 years from now when everyone is clamoring to see the former 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis and see what he might be able to do? Meanwhile, at that point in time, Puglisi will be in his 3rd, I think even 4th year in the program. So I think that Curtis is already speaking so fondly of Puglisi, and look, things are going to change in that regard, especially as they become teammates and they get competitive. But that there's already this sense of camaraderie there, I think speaks to how much better of a situation this quarterback room is in 2025. And just how much, as you point out as well, how much, because Kirby has grown as a coach, he is better able and better equipped to handle all the drama and all the things that come with adding a 5-star quarterback like Jared Curtis to the roster.
No, I think that's probably true. Hey, give me a real quick thought, too, what we talked about earlier, and you and I talked about this yesterday on video as well, the fact that, I think Mike Bobo steps up as kind of one of the big winners in all of this.
Yeah, wrote about it today. This is a huge endorsement for Mike Bobo. And look, he's got to go out and produce this season. He knows that. I don't put everything that went wrong with the offense on Mike Bobo last year. He wasn't the one out there dropping passes. And the injury situation is what it was for Georgia a season ago. But this is a huge win just in the sense that Curtis believes that this is the guy that can help get the most out of him going forward. So for Mike Bobo, a guy who's come under plenty of criticism this offseason, this is a showing that, hey, I still bring tremendous value to this program. And high school kids, as you often point out, BA, recruits are always the first one to know. And for someone like Curtis to endorse Bobo in this public of a manner, I think says a lot about how players feel about Mike Bobo and what he brings to the table.
Connor, great stuff. You've already written plenty on Curtis. We look forward to reading a whole lot more. Thanks for being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We will talk to you again very, very soon.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, good stuff there from Connor Riley, Jake Fromm. Coming up in a matter of moments. Prior to that, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let's get you ready for the DawgNation Cruise here in 2026. So much excitement about that already. Staterooms booking left and right. I love to see the excitement about this. And as I said before, that really needs to be your theme when it comes to a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Book sooner, get a great price, also take advantage while there's stateroom opportunity. These ships are very, very popular right now. The DawgNation Cruise, will be on a sold-out ship next year, so make sure you're part of that April 20th through the 24th next year in 2026. Our good friend Jessica Slater, wonderful travel advisor. She can tell you all about it. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Also, email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready to go on all of that. And don't forget, later on this summer, Star of the Seas debuts. We are so excited about that. The brand new Icon class of ships. There's just so much to be excited about, look forward to when it comes to Royal Caribbean here in 2025 going into 2026. All right, a couple of stories I want to hit here just for a moment. So where Shane Beamer, the South Carolina coach, speaking of old school, was ripping the NCAA. It's a very old school thing to do. So they've taken a running back transfer named Raul Faison, and he's another one of these guys that has like some junior college years that they're going to basically ignore to kind of give him more eligibility at South Carolina. Court cases seem to be opening the door for this, but you need the NCAA to sign off on it. And according to Beamer, the NCAA is moving very slow and not giving them the full thumbs up on their guy Faison, which he's like, listen, the spring portal's already closed. We're operating as if this is our running back or one of our running backs here for this year, but the NCAA won't say for sure. He's like, that's got to start moving. And this kind of reminds me of what I've always sort of disliked about the NCAA. People always kind of rail on the NCAA, but oftentimes it's not for specific reasons. People forget that the NCAA actually just is the membership. The body, the entity operates the way in which the university presidents want college sports to operate. And there was a time in which no one questioned the power of the NCAA, and frankly, the NCAA operated like an authoritarian. They just sort of made heavy-handed decisions, or they made almost no decision at all, moving very slowly like they are in this case with Beamer, and they just knew they could get away with it because no one questioned their authority. But the frustration I have with the NCAA is once their authority started being questioned, well, now they won't defend themselves at all. They're literally afraid of the public backlash, and so they've become kind of a feckless entity. That's my distaste for the NCAA. But in this particular case, you sort of wonder, is something like this one day how all of this comes to an end, however you choose to define all of this, where eventually one of these programs will be like, y'all, if you're not going to rule on this, we're just moving on without you. We're playing our guy because if we go to court, we're going to win anyway. Like, do we get to the point where eventually these programs are like, I don't care what the NCAA says, we're sort of doing our own thing, and they can either sign off on it or ignore us, but we're playing football with our guy here, no matter what the NCAA chooses to say. I sort of hope we don't get to that point because I think you need rules to have a sport. But if the NCAA in an efficient manner can't create and then enforce some rules, then it really serves no purpose for existing. So I guess we'll follow stories such as this. I thought it was interesting that fresh off losing the battle for Jared Curtis yesterday, Oregon has apparently pivoted pretty quickly here. Ryder Lyons is a quarterback you may have heard of. He is also a five-star. He's from Folsom, California. I guess of Johnny Cash fame. But nonetheless, so very quickly, you've already seen some online predictions coming in for Oregon to now get Lyons after not getting Curtis. It shows you, to me, a couple of pretty important things. Thing number one is Oregon was clearly coming, heavy in this case on Jared Curtis, so much so that after they lost Curtis, apparently the funds they were going to give Curtis, they're just now really ready to give to Lyons, and apparently he's ready to listen. So it shows you that Oregon was playing full speed in pursuit of Jared Curtis, but Georgia won anyway. And maybe it won by being the highest bidder, or maybe it didn't. But either way, Georgia had a lot to sell to Curtis yesterday because Oregon was clearly trying to put its best foot forward, so much so that right after losing Curtis, they're already on to the next and seemingly in a pretty good spot here with a guy like Lyons. It just goes to show you how competitive this battle was. Maybe more of the reason why Georgia deserves the credit for winning it. And I'll also mention this very briefly. Interesting to see the backlash we talked about yesterday. Sharon Moore, self-imposed penalty by Michigan to not sit out the first two games of the season, sit out game 3 and game 4 against, I guess, lesser competition. Very strange situation for the Wolverines, and kind of an obvious signal that whatever happened with Connor Stallions, that's not going away anytime soon. We'll perhaps talk more about that in the days ahead. For now, though, let's make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, we'll also get ready to shift gears and go to a Kroger Fresh Take and bring on the great former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm to the program here today. Jake's also been working on his golf game, I understand. Now, Jake, I have, as a distinguished member of the broadcast media, I have sources everywhere. You should understand that. You don't, get to where I am without having a network of sources and spies. Word on the street is you performed pretty well yesterday at the David Pollock Family Foundation golf tournament. So I'll give you a chance to brag on yourself a little bit. I heard you were swinging them pretty well yesterday.
Well, Brandon, always good to be here on the show. And I just want to say thank you so much for bringing this up. Any chance that I am able or I have to kind of rub it in with David Pollock, I will do so because it is just so fun. He's just ultra competitive, just like myself. And thankful to come out with a win, champions of the David Family Foundation golf tournament. Swinging them pretty good yesterday, and we scored pretty well.
David is obviously a very good athlete, as a former first-round pick would be, even post-injury. He's still a really good athlete. I've seen him basketball, things like that. He holds his own athletically in almost any endeavor. What kind of golfer is David Pollock? Does David swing the clubs okay? Because I've never seen him do that.
No, David is one of the most special athletes I've ever seen. Anything he wants to do, he can do, and at an extremely high level. David's a really good golfer, got plenty of finesse in his game. He's actually better with his irons and short game than you would think. And the driver was actually the last phase of his game that kind of needed some work. Of course, after I had beat him in a friendly match, he had to go and get fitted for a driver, and he came back with a brand new shiny driver. So still can't outdrive me. Just want to make that clear to everybody here on the show. And he still can't beat me. So just throwing that out there.
You know, sometimes for the taller guys, it's a little bit hard to sort of figure out how to not to let your power leak a little bit. You get the impression if he ever figures out how to get on playing with that swing, it's going to travel. But sometimes if you didn't grow up doing this, you don't always necessarily kind of know how to do it. Perhaps that's the case. But it's nice to know you dropped the line in there that you are still out driving David Pollock. That's very interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, as big and strong as David Pollock is, for playing just, a physical position, physically superior, position in the game of football, he gets beat and outdriven by just a normal quarterback, just like myself. So it happens to the best of them. It really does.
On a serious note, I know that Lindsay has always been a huge part of the Pollock Family Foundation. Obviously, Dog fans have been following very closely. Her, recent health scare, obviously, going through brain surgery, things like that. David gave a little bit of an update on social media about this other day. Anything you can tell us about how Lindsay's doing? Because I know if you've been to the Pollock Family Foundation stuff before, she's always a big part of all of that. Any update on Lindsay yesterday? Because a lot of Georgia fans have been really deep in prayer for her as she kind of goes through, obviously, a pretty serious health concern here.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, just a ton of people have really rallied around her and their family. Talked to her yesterday. She seems to be doing great. So glad she's back on track. It's always just a joy to see her and their family. And she's the anchor of that family, and she does just a fantastic job of being a wife and being a mother, and she seems to be doing great.
Answer to prayer for many. That's certainly a nice thing to be able to hear. Georgia got big news yesterday. The 5-star quarterback Jared Curtis from Tennessee makes his pledge to UGA. This, to me, seems like a really interesting prospect. One of the things that does come up, though, Jake, is, it's not Georgia high school football. It's, private school in Nashville. And I want to tell you my thought on this. I want you to tell me if you agree, and you certainly have every right to disagree. That's why we have you on here. I'm a big believer that if you're an elite prospect, it's almost like your level of competition doesn't necessarily matter to me, because if you're truly like a 5-star quarterback, it's sort of all inferior competition. There's going to be open receivers. If you've got the big arm, you can make all the throws. Therefore, you should be putting up numbers against lesser competition, stellar competition, everything else in between. So whether it be Arch Manning, who played at private school in New Orleans, or Jared Curtis, who plays private school in Nashville, that doesn't matter to me very much. I do like it when guys, play at Houston County or play at Milton or play at, wherever else. I do like guys who play in big-time competition, but I don't need you to play Georgia 6A or Georgia 5A football to feel like you can make it at the college level. We have enough counterexamples to show that an elite prospect is an elite prospect wherever he plays. Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, I agree with you here, Brandon, but I will say two things about it. I will say, all things being equal, I'm going to take the guy who plays a higher caliber high school football, just because I think he's just kind of been through it a little bit more versus better competition. He's seen more things. And then two, I would say, I think it makes the transition from high school to college easier. Kind of when you go, from kind of playing against guys in practice against, on Friday Night Lights, I think that helps that transition to playing on Saturdays a little bit easier, because you're used to that kind of speed and that kind of game, the size, the physicality, the whole thing. For the most part, I do agree with you're talking about the prospect. I think good players are just going to be good players. But all things being equal, I think I am going to take the guy that's been exposed to better higher caliber football.
Oh, anything else stand out to you about Curtis? I'm not even sure how much you've had a chance to see him. What stands out to you when you watch, what Jared does, or if any personal interaction you may have had with him? Just what are your thoughts on Georgia adding Curtis?
Yeah, man, I wish I could say I knew more about him, as a player and as a person than I do. I haven't really kind of driven and gone into his tape. but everything that I hear seems to be great things. And then obviously now that he has committed, man, I'm gonna get on and watch and see what this guy looks like. And from all things that I've heard, this guy can really spin it.
One of the things that I am, and I joke about all the time, I'm pretty sentimental, and I sort of like sentimental recruitments. For instance, there was a time when Stetson Bennett was asked about like the all-time great Georgia quarterbacks, and he went on like a 2-minute diatribe about who you'd rank here, who you'd rank there, because he knew them all. Like, he grew up a Georgia fan. Like, you got the impression that being the Georgia quarterback was like the culmination of a lifelong dream for him. I remember when you were recruiting in 2017, you knew, like, at least the sense that I got was you knew every prospect in that 2017 class because you were just so into that sort of facet of what was happening, not just with you, but kind of around you. And I don't mean this in any way critical, but I would say that the Jared Curtis recruitment feels a little bit different than that, in the fact that it wasn't one of these things where Jared grew up dreaming of playing for Georgia, and it seems like he's kind of been to his own process here and perhaps has not been, a part of the larger recruiting landscape quite as much. It's not as sentimental of recruitment as I think we sometimes see. It is just sort of a different age which we live in now where, and you probably should go about your business this way, but it seems like a little bit more of a business-like oriented decision. I don't just mean from the NIL standpoint. I mean with all the facets of this, of the offense I'm going to play for, the people I'm going to have around me, the situation here. There is a very interesting aspect of this recruitment that I don't think is quite as sentimental as some of the recruitments we've seen in the past, which is not a bad thing. It just sort of shows that I think now, Jake, just kind of live in a different age, right?
Yeah, I think that's just the nature of the game and how it's evolved, especially collegiate football and NIL, transfer portal, the whole nine. I think that's just the nature of how the game, how the recruiting process is now. I don't think it's any fault to him.
Yeah.
I don't think, because you don't live, or not from the state of Georgia, that you can't play quarterback here. Obviously, that's not true. If you're going to draw kind of any analogies here, this is a lot like, maybe Matthew Stafford, committing, the first, number one ranked quarterback in the class since Matthew Stafford. So I don't know. To me, I don't think this is any fault to him at all. I did see a tweet. I wish I could give credit. I forgot who tweeted it, but there has to be a lot of respect for him because he said he was going to announce at 5:30, and at 5:30 he announced. It's probably the first time a 5-star has done that in a long time where it was actually on time. So respect him for doing that, and just being a man true to his word.
I want to ask another aspect about this here coming up, but remind folks before that it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, we're getting ready for a fun time of year, whether it be kind of the end of school. Many people have graduation parties. You sort of have these, kind of end of baseball season or whatever spring sport you're doing, kind of team parties. You're getting ready for pool parties, all kind of. My daughter's got a birthday party coming up. Just sort of seems like you just kind of move into summer. There's a lot more outdoor activities. Everybody kind of hanging out, having a good time. And you, of course, want to make that as fun as you possibly can for your friends and family. And our friends at Kroger make all of that possible for you. And one of the great ways to take advantage of this is by becoming a member of Kroger Boost. That means the things you buy at your local Kroger, not only do you get fuel points for that, you get twice the fuel points as a Kroger Boost member. You can also take advantage of free grocery pickup, free delivery, getting more convenience, and saving a little bit of money at the pump. All of the great reasons to become a Kroger Boost member. So find out more online today and learn how you can try it for free for 30 days. It's Kroger.com/boost. That is Kroger.com/boost. All right, Jake, last thing I'll ask you about this for right now is I think the dynamic of a player recruit of this magnitude coming into an entrenched program is kind of interesting. The example we use a little early in the show is after you did what you did in 2017, you were going to be the starting quarterback at Georgia. You took the team within an eyelash winning the national championship. You were going to be the starting quarterback. But then Justin Fields came in. Justin was a great talent. He's, obviously, went on to do big things in his career, had good seasons at Ohio State. But at that time, you were the starting quarterback at Georgia. And I do think that created a little bit of a weird vibe there for a while. And I do think that people kind of wonder, okay, well, how would a guy like Jared Curtis maybe handle that, whether he is the guy or has to wait, his turn? We've seen guys like Arch Manning wait and seemingly be pretty patient, be pretty happy with that. I don't know that everybody's wired that way. I guess what I'm asking is is making sense of how the chemistry dynamic is going to work out with the player is just as important as evaluating his skill set, is it not?
Yeah, I think so. I will say in general, the best quarterback rooms just have this understood respect, in the room that everybody really in that room wants to be the guy. Everybody wants to be the starting quarterback, and there's only one of those on each football team. So, kind of there's that reality when you walk in, and Jared Curtis, when he walks in, onto campus, he's going to want to be that guy. Kirby is always trying to bring in the best guys that he can to promote competition, especially in the quarterback room. And I will say, kind of off on a side note, if this Arch Manning kind of philosophy works, I think you could see a lot more guys kind of going that route. Hey, let's come in, let's learn. Quite honestly, let's collect an NIL check really for not playing at all. And let's grow and develop instead of being rushed to go play and just demanding so much and so early. So if this works for Arch Manning and he comes out and has an absolute blistering of a season, I could see a lot more guys coming out of high school wanting to go into those kind of unique scenarios to really grow and develop and being ready when they get that opportunity.
No, I think that's really smart. Before we let you go, we'll show this on the screen here. Our guy Buck Ballou tweeting this out. This is the winning scorecard from the Pollock Family Foundation right there. How about the total going 40? Amazing.
It was net. This is not a gross score. This is net factored in for handicaps. By no means do we go out and shoot a 40. And there was a few gimmicky holes there. So, but everybody was playing under the same rules. So
yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
No, listen. You deserve to take your bow. You deserve your credit for that today. Playing as the quarterback should. So you love all of that. And Jake, sure enough, I appreciate your time on this. When Georgia gets a big-time quarterback, obviously people care about your opinion on matters such as this. We certainly appreciate your wisdom on that, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily.
Thanks, Brent. See you next week.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm there as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take today, and fun to see him having a good time with the Pollock Family Foundation. We were supposed to do that event a couple of years ago, and it just deluged, just rained like crazy, and so we ended up missing our chance to be a part of it. Maybe one of these days we can kind of line it up again and be a part of that Pollock Family Foundation, because it is certainly a great event to be a part of. We certainly appreciate Jake Fromm's time today. And great to hear a good update there on Lindsey Pollock as well, who has been certainly courageous in her battle. Obviously recently had brain surgery, and yet seems like prayers being answered there on that, and hopefully David will continue to keep us updated on all of that. There has been obviously a lot of reasons for Georgia fans to kind of come together lately and rally around each other, and so one of the things is Georgia fans kind of always answer that call anytime that happens. Let's also give you a golden shoe today. Our buddy Ryan Walker, very, very talented guy, a big part of our comment section, has joined our post-game shows, things like that. Ryan's a great guy. He put a really fun graphic together calling it Cinco de Curtis. You see Jared Curtis with the Cinco de Mayo theming there. You got the hot sauce. You got all kinds of great stuff. He says, happy Cinco de Curtis. Jared's a dog. And then I told him I loved it. And he said, I hope it makes the golden shoe tomorrow. I had to make a cool one for our new #1 quarterback in the nation. No doubt, Ryan. Well-deserved golden shoe coming your way for that on May the 5th. Curtis made it official, known for maybe forever as Cinco de Curtis. So fun stuff there from Ryan Walker. We'll give you a golden shoe for that. Lousy, stinking Gators. How about the Gator Hater Updater, 1,641 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We hope all of you have a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that. But take your comments. I've already told our team here, putting DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro, together today, that after a long day yesterday, live edition of DawgNation Daily, live coverage of Jared Curtis, on the beat with Cody and Mike after that, kind of react to the Curtis news. Big broadcast day yesterday. We're trying to get people out of here today get them a chance to kind of recharge their battery. So we are not going to go just endless hours on this. Adam J. asking about the Dog Nation Cruise giveaway. That is done by our legal, and I don't know that I have an answer to that. That's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer to that. Good question. Paul Moon. By the way, it's good to see. We didn't see Paul Moon in a while. Paul, I missed you. I'm glad to have you here. He says he's calling it that we're going to make it to noon today. That is not our intention. I will tell you that. That is not our intention. Let's see what else. But Adam J., I am glad you're listening from out of state. I don't know how our giveaway is going to work. A lot of that is sort of done above my head. One of the things that I made it very clear about when we first kind of started doing some of the stuff we do here around Dog Nation, any kind of contest or giveaway, I don't want to be a part of deciding the answer, the winner at all. I want no role in that. All I want to do is read the winner. So draw the name, verify the information, give me the name. I'll read this is in person for the stuff we do at our live events, for the stuff we do on the air. I do like the fact that we give a lot of stuff away. We do a lot of things like that. But when it comes to the actual execution of this, I don't want to be any part of that. Don't want to be any part of that. But yeah. Let's see what else is going on here on YouTube. Jack Fullerton, I think, giving some health advice, saying no desserts, 1 pint of soda a week, and water the rest of the time. I will say that one of the things I've kind of learned to do is, I love Dr. Pepper. Y'all know that. That's really is a true story. I've really kind of, my body's just very much gotten used to like the diet or the Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar. I've pretty effectively made a transition to that. And it makes me happy. I get no calories from it. Now, listen, I'm also as fat as can be right now, but generally speaking, kind of avoiding those caloric sodas is a pretty big deal, right? You get a lot from that. Let's see what else. Let me pop over a couple of the other comment sections just for a moment. But at the same time, you talk about I'm also a big believer that while it's good to make, good health decisions most of the time, every now and then sort of letting yourself have a little bit of a treat is a good thing too. Yard Dog says that he's encouraged that Jared Curtis and Ryan Puglisi seem to have a relationship. Yeah, that's a nice thing. That is a nice thing. Let's see what else. Bill Camacho on the subject of, kind of going back to looking at an old game. DT pointing out that Jake Fromm had Georgia in the lead in overtime of a national championship as a freshman. Yeah, it was a remarkable freshman season. I'll tell you, one of the best games, the best game Jake ever played was against Florida in 2018. I believe that was his best game. But he really played a very good game against Oklahoma. Speaking of, I mentioned Stetson Bennett kind of knowing the old Georgia quarterback history. As Rambo points out, Nate Frazier, who is not, he's from California. Nate Frazier was rattling off Georgia running back history and kind of paying homage with the bow and the jazz hands and stuff like that. That was really good. You're right about that. Really good. UJ Marine on the idea of ignoring the NCAA. He said that I guess Mike Gundy had floated the idea of ignoring the NCAA on playing a spring game. Yeah, I don't necessarily want a team to do this. I really don't. I actually sort of want an NCAA. I haven't really thought about this, but I'm sort of thinking about this now. I sort of want there to be an NCAA or an organization that functions like the NCAA. I want them to have power. I just want them to use their power for sensible things. That's kind of what I want. So when I float the idea, hey, one of these days somebody's just going to ignore the NCAA, like, I don't necessarily want that to happen. I mean, honestly, like, I think if the NCAA goes away, that's kind of moving us in the wrong direction from where I want. I want more control over college athletics. I want more established authority for college athletics. I want some rule structure. I just don't want it to be sort of lost in tedium like it maybe sometimes has been in the past. But yeah, you're right. I mean, but whether it be a Gundy or a Beamer or something, it certainly seems like one of these days. What's the old Andrew Jackson line about the court's made its decision, now let them enforce it? We may get one of those when it comes to a coach. The NCAA's made its decision, now let them enforce it. And I don't say that lightly, but it may happen. Let's see what else. Rambo also bring up the idea of a salary cap. Yeah, it's important to note that what you really have in college football is a budget. It's not going to be a salary cap, even in a house settlement world in which there will be revenue sharing. There is a limit to what you can spend on football, but it's kind of an imposed limit. But NIL on top of this is theoretically endless. And after all this, it's just going to, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I think this. I'm not saying I acknowledge this. But there will be people who are going to say it's just going to be payments under the table. And whether it be under the table again, I'm not willing to stipulate what's happened in the past. But whether it's return to a bygone era or, something new and different, there are people who will say, I am not saying this, nor am I willing to say this out loud, but there are going to be people who will say, well, you make all these rules about, what guys can get paid, but, the market's going to find a way. All right, let me go to Facebook for a moment. We'll see how they're doing. Let's see what else is going on. On the Facebook side of things, you ever feel like just like half the emails you get or whatever is just all spam? And the spam is sort of designed to look like a real email, which makes you actually ignore the real emails that you do get because they just sort of end up looking like spam too. Anyway. Ken Holcomb says we have a full quarterback room coming up. I hope everyone realizes they have to wait their turn. That being said, who do you think will hit the portal and win? Yeah, so the one thing I don't love doing is predicting who will go into the portal because sometimes guys just don't. And I think sometimes people have projected unhappiness onto Georgia players that hasn't actually been true, that so-and-so's not playing, so therefore he must be unhappy. And yet, in actuality, to talk to the player or to talk to people close to the player, not always the case necessarily. Some guys will leave. I am pretty ambivalent about it, and it's not a bad question. I'm not saying that it is. It's not a bad question. But the reason why I don't like answering it is because by answering it, it's almost like I would say, well, so-and-so's definitely never playing here, so he might as well hit the road tomorrow. And history just goes to show you that if you did make those predictions, you'd have a really good chance of being wrong. So it sort of seemed for a while that the Georgia quarterback situation, a word that I've used before, is sensible. That things were getting a little bit more sensible. That for a long time, the Georgia quarterback situation, and it's not anybody's fault, I don't think, but it was just kind of chaotic. Kirby came in year one, happened to inherit the Gatorade Player of the Year. And so, of course, on a team that was not quite super well stocked with talent, might as well see what you have in the young guy. And Eason was fine. I would say not great. And from, if Eason is Matthew Stafford, well, things for Georgia are really different. And from a recruiting standpoint, he easily could have been. But Jacob Eason was, and I'm not picking on him, I'm not criticizing, I'm just trying to be candid. Jacob Eason was not Matthew Stafford. Eason was not the most accurate passer, unfortunately, and that hurt him. And so from there, you have this weird series of dominoes, okay, where thankfully Jake Fromm stepped in 2017 after Jacob Eason got hurt. And suddenly Jake Fromm is playing. Now, Fromm is a good recruit. He's playing, I would say, as a freshman, better than maybe you could have assumed that he would, certainly leading Georgia to more team success than anybody would have ever thought was imaginable. And so at that point in time, man, the one thing we knew about Georgia is Jake Fromm is the guy. But then lo and behold, you got Justin Fields kind of coming in. That creates its weirdness. Then Fields is gone as quickly as he came. And then you kind of go into a situation where it seemed like moving into 2020, Georgia didn't have a quarterback. It's supposed to be this guy we'd never heard of from Wake Forest, and then he's gone, and then JT Daniels is transferring in, but for some reason he can't get medically cleared. And then, if Stetson Bennett, people about the Stetson Bennett era, they sort of forget about 2020. If Georgia didn't have Stetson Bennett, do you know what Georgia's record would have been in 2020? My gosh. That would have been – that's pandemic, so maybe it doesn't matter, but there's a chance that Georgia could have just been flat out bad, like a bad team. They could have had a bad record. Bennett really saved them. Then JT Daniels is coming in. He's the new savior. He's former 5-star. And, within a couple of years, JT Daniels wasn't even playing football anymore. He just stopped playing football. Obviously never achieved, at Georgia what he was supposed to, and I'm not blaming him for that. It just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And then lo and behold, here's a guy like Stetson Bennett who I've never seen somebody be, it's the sports movie is, well, so-and-so got counted out and he stepped up and showed everybody how good he was. But even in the movies, you don't get counted out twice. Bennett was never given a chance to be the starting quarterback, became that, and then sort of disregarded again. When Bennett became the starter for the UAB game in 2021, we were told he wasn't even really getting practice reps prior to that. He was the number 4 quarterback on the roster, I guess, wasn't he? Number 3, whatever it was. But he wasn't really getting a lot of practice reps. And then he comes in, has a record-setting day, and then goes on to win 2 national championships and becomes a Heisman finalist. That's a very weird, not bad necessarily, because it worked out for Georgia, but it was certainly weird progression of quarterbacks. I really thought that when the veteran Carson Beck beat out the less senior Brock Vandegrift, that Georgia was kind of going to create a new lineage of quarterback that was just a little bit more sensible, and that Beck might give way to Vandegrift, and then Vandegrift might give way to Stockton, and you just sort of have, sort of a lineage of quarterbacks where the older guy kind of emerged, and for a while things might be sort of semi-normal. Well, that didn't last very long because whatever happened to Beck last year happened. Not all his own doing, of course. He was, certainly dealing with a running game that was struggling and a lot of drops from receivers. There's plenty of blame to go around, but the ascension of Beck that was sort of foretold in 2023 did not occur in 2024. So now we're sort of back to, kind of wondering, okay, well, does, Gunnar Stockton sort of begin a new lineage of normalcy for Georgia, and can this one actually last? We shall see. So it's a long answer to a very simple question of the Georgia quarterback situation historically is pretty difficult to predict. I'm a lot more comfortable saying whoever plays quarterback for Georgia is going to probably do fine because that's what typically happens. We haven't really seen Georgia sort of break through and have what I would call great quarterback play yet. I would say that Bennett's a historic figure. It was massive in the biggest games, indisputable. But if you define like great quarterback play by like first round pick, top 10 pick, something like that, we haven't seen that yet. But we've also seen Georgia be good at the quarterback position, at least good, almost every year, and I'm guessing that'll remain true. So, long answer to a much shorter question. Foster Moss talking about how the Staquavius era kind of changed what the era could have been. Yeah, I mean, if Georgia had been bad in 2020, and they could have been, it would have been an interesting discussion, right? It would have been an interesting discussion. And maybe they could have tried to get Carson ready, I guess. But, that was kind of a mess. Kind of a mess. But everybody was a mess that year. It was a weird year. Everybody was a mess that year. Well, unfortunately, listen, I'm not here to speak ill, but I mean, the problem is, let me not, just because the name that came up was Dwan Mathis. Dwan Mathis was a fine young man, and he obviously overcame a lot in his own life too, but not quite a quarterback, literally. So Ken Holcomb was okay with my meandering answer, where I did everything but answer the one simple question that he had asked. Very funny. Let's see what else. On Facebook, Octavius Oliver says that Michelle and Chubb played a good game against Oklahoma, but Jake did his thing. Chubb and Michelle were historic against Oklahoma. I'm not taking away from them. But Jake Fromm made some big throws in that game, especially in the second half. Fromm made some nice big throws in that second half. Now, Chubb and Michelle were historic in that game. And I don't think that Fromm's performance was as good as it would have been against Florida in 2018. That was really one of the red-letter days for a Georgia quarterback. Really, really good. And that game had some historic significance kind of around it too, I think, which is kind of interesting. But I thought that Fromm was really good against Oklahoma too. The game was 50-something to 40-something. There's plenty of offense to go around that day. MG says, still waiting on Bobo to prove that he can coach a great-looking offense. The awful first halves all year were maddening. Maybe Gunner's confidence with the offense will change. I mean, listen, I don't deny Georgia needs to be better offensively, and some of that for whatever reason. I honestly don't really know. I won't pretend to be smarter than I am. I don't know why they get off to such slow starts offensively. They even did some of that in 2023. I really don't know. I would say that today is a tough day to be on the anti-Bobo, train. But I do get where you're coming from, at least in terms of the need for offensive improvement. Let's see what else. Silent Chaos. By the way, speaking of like blast in the past, good to have Silent Chaos back in here. Silent Chaos been with us for a long time, but I haven't seen him as much lately. He mentions, Gunner Stockton and his propensity for a very courageous running style that doesn't always lend itself to good health. The run against Texas is an example of that. I do believe that if they want to use Gunner's legs in games this year, you can't leave yourself open for the big hit quite as much as Stockton did in that moment against Texas and kind of hasn't. I mean, if you watch the slow motion of that, like before the hit happens, Gunner kind of lowers his shoulder to sort of deliver a blow of his own, and you just can't do that. You just can't do that. The guy's he's coming at you full speed. You just got to be. And listen, that moment won the game for Georgia, so we're glad that he did what he did. But as a long-term sort of act of preservation, probably don't need to do that. Adam J says he asked Chat GPT to predict the next 10 national champions. He says DawgNation will be thrilled. Well, that's good to know. Glad to know that AI is on Georgia's side here. I'll say this too, speaking of AI. So yesterday, I am walking. We have a new studio that we're working on. We're getting closer to unveiling. And it's in town in Atlanta. And so I'm walking the streets a little bit. And I saw one of those. Is a Waymo? Is that what it's called? One of those driverless cars? I saw one of those yesterday. And it kind of reminded me that the other day, so we get off the cruise ship in Port Canaveral. There's a nice little spot when we got a little breakfast. And, Port Canaveral is just right next to the Kennedy Space Center. And so one of the SpaceX rockets took off. So I'm sitting there eating my breakfast and having just gotten off the cruise ship. And right there across the intercoastal, you see the just sort of the SpaceX rocket just take off into the air. And you sort of think, driverless car, rockets to space, all of this, we can just look around our daily lives and see. Feels like we're kind of living in the future, doesn't it? You ever think about that? That we're not quite like the Star Wars or you kid, you were watching like the Jetsons, the cartoon. We're not quite the Jetsons. We're not flying cars, but we're getting closer, I guess. It feels like we kind of live in the future now. I mean, for a long time, I did not feel like the future was what I was promised it would be. But I sort of feel like we're getting to sort of a sci-fi type future existence. I feel like we're kind of getting there. All right, let us see what else. Anything else before we go? Let me go back to DawgNation.com. Rambo talking about kind of building the perfect quarterback. I mean, there's no doubt that like the moxie that Bennett had exceeded his physical characteristics. And I do think I think there's an important lesson to take from that. Now, it doesn't always work that way. If your life depended on it, you would still rather have the quarterback with the big-time physical traits. And if I had more time, I meant to talk to Connor about this. Because obviously, Georgia's had some five-star guys that haven't always panned out. But the five-star is still a 50-50 proposition. And any lesser recruit than that's a lot less than 50%. So nothing's guaranteed. And it certainly seems like sometimes there's the intangible characteristic that seems to matter almost more than the physical stuff. But if your life really depended on it, like if you had to have a guy step up in order to put food on the table, you'd still probably bet on the physical traits, I think. Garrison Tucker says A.J. Smith Shawver last night. Yeah, darn near pitched no-hitter. The game was over in like 15 minutes. It was like the fastest game I'd seen in forever. But nice to see Atlanta get a good performance from him last night. I did love that. Garrison, I'm glad you bring that up. I did love that. UGA Marine says that the Curtis praise of Bobo may be driving the Bobo detractors insane. I do think sometimes it kind of creates a little bit of a galaxy brain thing of, well, if you're, it's like, well, if you're anti-Bobo, but Curtis is pro-Bobo, does that mean you have to be anti-Curtis? Now, no Georgia fan wants to do that. But also, if you're pro-Curtis, does that mean you have to be pro-Bobo? Like, I do think there's a thing out there where people are trying to decide, can I be pro-Jared Curtis and still anti-Mike Bobo? Is there a way to kind of like split the difference on that? I do think some people are kind of wondering that at the moment. Richard D says, does Jared Curtis have the Joe Burrow potential? See, here's one of those interesting things where, I mean, I didn't even know that Joe Burrow had the Joe Burrow potential because, like, people forget Burrow was the starting quarterback for LSU in 2018, and he was good. I mean, Georgia got blasted by LSU in Baton Rouge that year. One of the really low-key, one of the worst games the Kirby Smart had. That LSU game was an abomination, just absolutely abomination. That team was not in a good place at that time. And by the way, we talked about the Florida performance for Fromm. That was the following game after what was just an absolute abomination at LSU. It's one of the reasons why the Fromm performance was so important. It provided some stability for Georgia. But while LSU was just dragging Georgia up and down the field, I mean, Burrow was fine, but he wasn't that great. Burrow was playing pretty well by the end of the year. He had a nice bowl game performance, I guess. He was a good player, but nobody went into the 2019 season thinking Joe Burrow is Babe Ruth. Like, nobody went into that season thinking that. But pretty early in the season, we were already kind of getting some of those indications. Had a big shootout win against Texas, you remember that? And then it was sort of off and running from there. And by the time you get to about the midway point in the year, it's like LSU is scoring against everybody all the time. And then obviously he does what he does in the playoff, and still a very good NFL quarterback here too. I mean, very, very good. Obviously, kind of waiting for a big breakthrough moment, but very, very good. So the point is even the Burrow breakout wasn't necessarily foretold. And I've always attributed a lot of that to the fact that Joe Brady was hired as the passing game coordinator for LSU there in 2019. But the truth is, even since then, the Brady career, which I think is kind of back on the uptick again, he was head coach in Carolina. That didn't work out. Kind of bounced around as an assistant. He's back with Buffalo again. I think he's, is it Buffalo? Is that right? I think he's doing some good stuff with them. But it's not like I attribute the breakout for Burrow to Joe Brady, but it's not really like Brady has been a rocket ship to the moon every year since then either. So once again, this is a very long answer to a much simpler question. Could Jared Curtis be Joe Burrow? I reckon he could, but to this day, I'm still not quite so sure how Joe Burrow became Joe Burrow, if you want to know the truth about it. Yes, so Joe Brady is Buffalo Bills. And I think he's earning praise again for his work there, but it's a little bit of a checkered coaching career for him post his time at LSU. And that's another one of these guys. He has made it seemingly pretty clear he wants no part of return to college for what it's worth. All right, we got to go. Good stuff, everybody. Thank you for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. Water heater goes out, plumbing emergency, these things happen. You don't want to ruin your whole week by not being able to take a hot shower. So reach out to our friends at RS Andrews. In many cases, they can replace that for you the same day. But you got to find them online. It's rsandrews.com. All right, have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.